They appeared where there was no hope. In a land torn apart by clan wars, where the weak were trampled upon and the strong ruled, ordinary people turned pain into a weapon. Thus were born the ninjas, those who hid in the shadows and fought not for glory, but for survival. They were a curse to their enemies and a hope for the forgotten. But as suddenly as they rose, they disappeared, leaving behind only legends and silence. Medieval Japan was a land of endless fire. Villages burned, fields burned. Even temples where people sought salvation could not withstand the flames of war. At this time, the government fell into pieces, and each daimyo, each warlord, fought for his own lands. Samurai, brought up in a strict code of honor, fought relentlessly, but their loyalty belonged only to their masters, not to the common people. Therefore, the peasants, those who worked the land and fed the country, were left alone with the cruelty of the world. Famine cut down families faster than the sword. The fields stood empty, for the hands that had tilled them either lay dead or had been taken into the army. Children wandered without their parents, searching for a morsel of food among the ashes. Women carried infants in their arms, whom they had nothing to feed. And everywhere there was a sense of helplessness. Prayers brought no bread, and tears did not stop the wars. In these conditions, a sense of despair grew, which gradually turned into hatred. The people saw how the strong oppressed the weak, how the rich became even richer on someone else's misfortune. Human life had no value, and it was from this hell that a new power was to be born, not from light and not from honor, but from shadow and pain. Because when you are deprived of your home, family, and future, in the darkness you look for other ways. This darkness became the cradle of what would later be called ninjas, warriors born not from glory, but from ruins and ashes. The world in which people lived was cruel and merciless. The samurai, who were glorified in songs and legends, were in fact a shield only for those who had power, wealth, and title. Their loyalty not to ordinary people, but to their daimyo meant one thing. If you were born a simple peasant, your life was worthless. And the weak died not through their own fault, but because fate had despised them. Villages were burning, and the smoke from the burned houses covered the sky, turning it gray, heavy, and hopeless. Children who once ran through the fields now wandered among the ruins, not knowing where to go or who to look for. Women held babies in their arms, crying from hunger, and men who had been taken into the army did not return. In every village, the cries of those who were left alone with fear could be heard, and this cry mixed with the screams of those who were trying to escape from the invaders. The villagers looked at the samurai with sadness and anger at the same time. They knew that if anyone survived, it would not be because of the honor of the warriors, but in spite of it. Every battle, every order, every decision of the samurai left the common people defenseless. And then the question began to be born, whispered among the ruins and ashes. Who would protect those whom everyone had forgotten? Who would stand on the side of those who had neither weapons, nor power, nor even the right to life? Despair and hopelessness gradually turned into rage and a thirst for justice. The villagers began to look for those who would act differently, who would not wait for orders, who would not be limited by a code of honor. And in the darkness, in the midst of the night's fear, an idea emerged that would change everything. If the samurai did not protect the people, someone else would have to become their shadow. It was from this moment that the future of those who would be called ninjas was born in a world full of pain. Invisible warriors who would fight not for glory, but for the survival of those whom the world had forgotten. In the darkness, where even the slightest sound could cost lives, those the world had rejected began to gather. Exiles fleeing the vengeance of the daimyo, peasants who had lost everything, old monks searching for meaning after the loss of their temples, and even criminals who knew the rules of survival on the streets. They united. Each of them had their own story of pain, but they all shared one thing. The world had given them no chance, and they had to find their own. They quickly realized that open combat was their death. The sword and spear that the samurai wielded were stronger than any number. Therefore, they learned to hide, move silently, merge with the night. The shadow became their weapon, cunning their ally, and the trap their defense. Every day of training added to their skill, from silent movement to using the environment to their advantage, from small tricks to deadly traps for the enemy. Their purpose was simple but powerful: to protect those the world had forgotten. The homeless peasants became their hideouts. The old monks taught them to control their bodies and minds. The thieves taught them to be cunning and unpredictable. They all became one body, invisible, unpredictable, but deadly to those who dared to harm the weak. Thus was born the idea of the ninja, warriors who did not need a sword to be dangerous. They were not heroes, not knights, but those who acted in the shadows. Their world was different from the world of the samurai. There was no honor here, but there was justice, albeit harsh. And it was from this dark shadow that legends began to emerge, whispering among the fields and ruins, about those who disappear into the darkness, but leave behind hope. In the dark mountains of IGA, the first true clan emerged. It is said to have been founded by a mysterious teacher, whose name was whispered only at night, when the wind carried rumors through the empty villages. He knew that open struggle would only lead to death, so he taught those left with nothing the art of invisibility. His lessons were harsh: no honor, no glory, only survival. At the center of the clan stood one warrior, whose fate was written in fire and ashes. He lost his family during one of the samurai attacks. His parents burned down in their hut, and his sister was taken prisoner. His eyes saw only death and emptiness, but his heart did not break. It was this pain, this loss, that made him the first to truly understand what it means to be a ninja. Now he did not just protect people. He was a shadow who walked in the middle of the night to punish those who mercilessly destroyed the weak. Master IGA taught not only skills. He taught how to understand fear, control it, and turn it into a weapon. He showed how to disappear into the darkness, how to use noise and silence, how to leave only a shadow and a trace of fear. Each student became part of this dark world, where night was an ally and light was an enemy. Legends of the IGA clan spread quickly. In the village that survived the attacks, there were whispers of mysterious warriors who appeared only when everyone was asleep, and then disappeared, leaving their enemies in fear. But no one had seen their faces, and even among those who knew the teacher and warrior, doubts circulated. Could a man born of pain ever find peace? And so, in the darkness, the first shadow was born, the first clan that did not seek glory. It sought only revenge, justice, and survival. It was here that the path of the ninja was born, and it was here that a legend began that would forever leave its whisper among the fields and mountains. In caves and among the old temple ruins, the IGA clan gathered their treasures, not gold, but knowledge that smelled of earth and bitter leaves. What others called witchcraft was a craft to them: herbs that dulled pain, powders that made the moons blind to the eyes, ancient ways of linking breath with sound so that footsteps became silent. Master IGA composed this knowledge like an alchemist, combining medicine and war, life and death, in one ladle of science. They studied poisons not with evil intentions, but as a last resort, to relieve the suffering of captives, to punish ruthless masters, to turn the enemy's weapons into his own traps. They learned to weave a web of silence from thread, ropes that neutralize, traps that make no sound, and mirror tricks that beat at the enemy's mind. Every recipe, every move was passed down in whispers, an oath of no return. There were also rituals of the body: cold baths in mountain streams to temper the flesh, meditations in abandoned crypts to immerse oneself in silence, balancing exercises on narrow rooftops where a mistake is the last. The students learned to hear the night, how the rustle of leaves tells of the approach of the enemy, how the breathing of a horse indicates its intentions, how silence can be a trap. But most importantly, They learned to take fear from the hearts of others and put it in their dreams. They didn't just attack, they left behind a trail of doubt, and this doubt gradually destroyed the will of the enemy. The warrior Iga himself, who had lost his family, became a master of this knowledge. His hands could heal and kill, his voice could calm a child or break the will of a master. These secrets made them invisible and dangerous. But with power came responsibility. Knowledge that could change fates could also destroy souls. And each night of training planted another seed of doubt in the student's heart. Is revenge worth the price paid by those who carry it? Over time, the villagers began to whisper about those who appeared when their houses were burning and the enemy was standing outside the door. They did not see the faces, they did not know the names, they did not know the numbers. They only felt the presence, quiet, cold, like a breath of wind among the burned fields. No one knew when they would appear, but they were always there where the weakest needed protection. The villagers began to call them invisible defenders. But this protection was not gentle. The shadow warriors punished those who wronged the weak without mercy. They left their enemies enslaved by fear, sometimes in parts, as a warning to others. Those who did not understand their methods called them demonic. And indeed, shadows appeared in the night fields and forests that the enemy could not see, but from which the blood ran cold in the veins. But with the legend came increased danger. Rumors of invisible demons attracted the attention not only of the village defenders, but also of samurai and bandits who sought to destroy these mysterious warriors. The enemy could wait in the darkness, setting traps, poisoned arrows, and ambushes. Sometimes, even one wrong step in the middle of the night could cost the life not only of the enemy, but also of the ninja himself. Despite this, ninjas continued to appear where they were needed. They became a symbol of fear and hope at the same time. The villagers looked at the lights that had disappeared in the darkness, feeling that someone was protecting them. But at the same time, they understood that these warriors themselves were living on the verge of death. And it was this thin line between salvation and death that made the legend of the invisible demons even more terrifying and even more fascinating. Soon the shadows of Iga were no longer alone. In the mountains and forests, another clan appeared, the Koga. Their methods were different. They were even more cunning, even faster, and at the same time more ruthless. The two clan worlds began to intersect, and every time they met, there was a tense, almost physical coldness, as if the night itself had stopped to watch this struggle. Among the Iga warriors was one whose story became a legend among his students. His name was Hayato. He had endured the loss of his family to the point where even laughter could no longer touch his heart. When the Koga clan appeared, his past erupted again. Amidst new threats and ambushes, Hayato faced an enemy who reminded him of his own helplessness and the grief he had once experienced. This was not just a struggle for territory or influence. This was a personal battle that awakened old wounds. Koga and Iga began to compete for control of those who could still be protected. They traded blows in the night, leaving behind traces of fear, but also hope. Every shootout, every trap carried a double meaning: to survive on your own, and at the same time to protect those who could not protect themselves. Hayato felt that this struggle put him not only in front of the clan rivalry, but also in front of himself. Every step in the dark, every lost night, and every loss of a student reminded him of his own weakness. And it was this personal tragedy that made him invisible and deadly at the same time. He no longer fought for glory, he fought to never again feel the powerlessness that had once destroyed his family. In the dark mountains of Japan, two shadows intertwined, and each night became the arena where a new legend was born, a legend of people whose lives were filled with pain, but who turned it into the most terrible weapon. Night had fallen on the valleys, and with it came the first real war between Iga and Koga. This was no ordinary gunfight. This was a war of shadows, where every step could be the last. Hayato stood in the dark forest, listening to the sounds of the night, which was now full of gunshots, screams, and the rustling of deadly traps. He knew that today there would be no winners in the usual sense. Today, every loss meant pain that would last forever. Hayato's students were the first to fall. 1. A young peasant who had once learned to survive among the ruins of his village, lost his balance on a narrow roof while trying to outwit an enemy, and his body shattered in the shadows. Another, a former thief who knew all the tricks of night movement, fell into Koga's trap, poisoned arrows from severed hands. Each death echoed in Hayato's heart as a reminder of his own vulnerability. But the biggest blow awaited him closer to dawn. One of Koga's warriors, cunning and cruel, ambushed Hayato in a narrow corridor of a rocky gorge. His family tragedy came to life in his memories. Images of a burned house, a dead sister, and parents flashed before his eyes again. At that moment, he felt that he could not make any more mistakes. Retreat would mean the death of everyone he had sworn to protect. Hayato used everything he had learned: shadow, cunning, traps, the sense of the night. He threw the enemy off balance, and then ruthlessly neutralized him. But the victory was bitter. The bloody losses, the screams of the students, and the silence of the fields after the battle remained with him forever. He stood among the ruins and understood that the war would never end, and the darkness would always claim new victims. And that's when respect and fear were born at the same time. Ninjas were not heroes to be loved, but they became those to be feared and respected. Every night, every trap, and every loss created a legend that would eventually become a whisper among the trees and ruins, a legend of invisible avengers who walked a world where fear and pain ruled. After the first bloody war, the villages were left in a silence that was worse than a scream. The smoke had not yet cleared, and the land still smelled of burnt straw and human blood. The villagers who had survived the attack hid in caves and old ruins, for fear had taken root in their hearts. They no longer knew whom to trust, and only whispers about invisible avengers gave them a faint hope. Hayato returned to the ruins of his shelter, but the silence did not bring peace. Every step of the student, every look he took reminded him of his fallen friends. It seemed to him that the darkness itself was pressing down on his shoulders, reminding him of all the mistakes, all the failures. He saw in his dreams a burned family, heard the screams of the students he had not managed to save. And with this burden came a new task: to teach those who remained to be what he himself had already become: invisible, ruthless, but capable of protecting those whom the world had forgotten. New students came one by one. Some were orphans whose families had been killed in a clan war. Some were young men who had fled from the samurai who had destroyed their village. Some were women who had learned to survive among thieves and bandits. Each had his own pain, his own fears, his own demons. And Hayato took them under his wing, teaching them the art of the shadow, cunning, patience, and self-control. He knew that these children would be the ones to carry on the legend, and that each night they spent in the dark was a test of their strength. The villagers began to call these shadows not only protectors, but also guardians of their lives. But at the same time, they were afraid of these silent forces. No one knew whether they would be able to stop the enemy, or whether they would become cruel, like death itself. And Hayato, looking at the new generation, understood. The war had left scars inside it, and each student was a chance, but also a reminder of the losses. The darkness over the village remained, and only the quiet whisper of the night wind said that the real struggle was just beginning. The silence among the ruins of the village was deceptive. Hayato was teaching new students, controlling their movements and actions, when suddenly one of them, a young man named Sora, began to behave strangely. At first it was little things, disobedience in small tasks, questions that sounded too inquisitive. But then Hayato began to notice traces of something that could not be ignored: missing items, unknown traces near the camp, secret messages transmitted at night. Sora was not an enemy from without. He was among his own people. But his intentions were gradually becoming clear. He wanted to use the knowledge of the IGA clan not to protect the weak, but to gain his own power. He sought to create a new order where he would decide who would live and who would die. Hayato's idea of defenders was turning into an instrument of destruction. This coup turned everything Hayato had built up over the years. The students under his tutelage now faced a choice: to believe in their teacher's old principles or to follow the charismatic but dangerous Sora. The clan, born to protect the defenseless, suddenly became an arena of internal struggle. Shadow fought against shadow. Hayato felt his own heart break. He understood that not only the future of the clan depended on this moment, but also the fate of all those they had once promised to protect. He had to act quickly, but even his shadow skills were no guarantee of success. Sora already knew the tricks, had learned them, and was using them against his own teacher. But the real twist came when Hayato learned that Sora was not just a traitor. He carried a part of Hayato's past within him, an orphan from his home village, a survivor of the same attack that took Hayato's family. Sora saw the world differently, feeling the pain and revenge that Hayato had hidden. And now he became a mirror in which Hayato saw himself, but dark, cruel, ruthless. This twist makes Hayato rethink everything. Who is really the enemy? Who is friend? And can you remain a ninja when even those you've trained can become your own shadow? Night had fallen like a heavy blanket, and even the moon was hidden behind black clouds, as if the world itself was afraid of what was to come. Hayato stood on the edge of the cliff, looking down at the camp where his students slept in a silence that seemed as fragile as thin glass. And in the shadows of the trees moved Sora, a master of trickster, once an orphan from the same village as Hayato, now his mirror, dark and ruthless. Sora crept into the camp with a silent purpose: to overturn everything Hayato had created. His gaze was cold, and his steps were invisible. He believed in his own justice. Those who survive the war should become the new order, and the weak, only a shadow of his power. And every living soul that remained under Hayato's care was on the verge of death. Hayato felt his heart pounding like a bloody bell. He knew that any movement could cost his students their lives. He had to make a choice: fight and risk losing everyone, or try to lure Sora and leave the camp safe, even at the cost of his own authority. Every minute dragged on like an eternity, and the wind whispered the past, the burned village, the dead family, the screams of friends he had not managed to save. The silence was broken by a scream. Sora burst into the camp, and the students woke up, not understanding who the enemy was. In an instant, the light of the torches illuminated the blades, the shadows, and the fear. Hayato shouted, but his words were lost in the chaos. And then he saw one of the students, the child who was his hope for the continuation of the clan, was between him and Sora. Hayato's heart contracted, and a chill ran down his spine. He could not allow her to die. The choice was terrible. Hayato rushed forward, using every skill to stop Sora, but not harm the students. The blow hit Sora, but he dodged, and a deadly game began between them. Shadows, blades, traps, screams, and pain intertwined in chaos, where no one knew who would win. That night changed everything. Hayato learned that even the purest intentions could create chaos, that the shadow he created to protect him could turn against him. And as the wind carried the screams and echoes of the blade through the dark forest, Hayato felt the true value of who he had become, a shadow fighting not only the enemy outside, but also the darkness within himself. Dawn brought no relief. The camp, which had only yesterday breathed hope and shadow, had become a place of silent anxiety. The IGA clan was divided. Some of the students believed in Hayato, others surrendered to Sora, convinced that the new order was better than the old rules. The legend, born of pain and death, now threatened to collapse from within. Hayato stood among the ruins, his heart pounding with despair. He felt guilty for every loss, for the students who had died in the first war, for those Sora had been able to lure away, and for those he had failed to save last night. His own darkness, which had given him strength for years, now threatened to consume everything he had built. Sora went into the night, leading those who chose his path. Their shadows disappeared among the mountains, and with them disappeared part of the clan that could protect people. Villages that once whispered about invisible avengers now saw only emptiness and silence. Fear and despair gripped human hearts. The defenders became legend, and legend, a shadow of the past. Hayato was left alone. His eyes saw the dawn, but he could not feel the light. He felt only cold and emptiness. The darkness that once gave him strength was now his prison. He realized that their path had ended not heroically, but tragically. The clan had fallen apart. The legend remained, but the reality was full of loss and pain. The legend of the IGA ninja remained among the whispers of trees and mountains. The villagers continued to talk about invisible demons, but no one saw those who once came to protect the weak. The story of Hayato and his students turned into a sad legend about how even the purest intentions can be destroyed by betrayal, grief, and darkness of hearts. Night fell again, but this time without a whisper of hope. Only the wind carried the memory of those who lived and fought, and of those who became shadows so that light could pass through the darkness, even for a moment. The villages burned again, but this time not from clan warfare, but from the cruelty of the landlords. The people screamed, prayed, and called for help from those they once feared and revered, the invisible avengers, the IGA ninja. But the shadows that once came in the darkest hour did not appear. The legend melted away, leaving behind only emptiness and whispers of the past. The villagers hid in caves and basements, watching the burning houses, hearing the screams of children and the wailing of mothers. They believed that someone from the shadows would come, at least one, and save them. But the night remained silent, and only the darkness answered their calls. Amidst this despair, a young man appeared. He was one of Hayato's last students, those whom the master had taught the art of the shadow and self-control. He stood on the edge of the village, looking at the burning houses. His heart clenched with terror, but he knew that now his duty was to be what the clan had once been, a protector of the weak. He had no allies, no strength of numerous disciples, only his knowledge, his speed, and his courage. And yet he moved into the night to meet the enemy. The fight was short and brutal. The young man used all the skills that Hayato had once taught him: traps, hidden paths, lightning strikes. He saved as many as he could: children, old people, women. But the enemy was numerous and ruthless. In the end, he fell, giving his life for those he loved before they knew him. The villagers watched as his body disappeared into the darkness, as the last trace of shadow disappeared. He became a legend, the last and only one to come to help. And though no one else came, the memory of his sacrifice lived on in the whispers of children, in the eyes of those he saved, in the darkness that now remained silent, but no longer completely empty. Thus ended the era of the ninja. They did not disappear heroically. They disappeared like shadows, leaving behind a world that no longer waited for a miracle, and a legend that became a whisper of the wind among the fields and mountains. One young man who gave his life for his people became the final proof that even in darkness, light can be found, albeit fragile, like the flicker of a candle in the midst of a storm. How do you like the story? Write a review.